The conference room went silent the moment the woman in the paint-stained jacket set a manila folder on the polished table. The executives had been laughing 30 seconds earlier, laughing at her shoes, specifically work boots caked with dried mud, the kind that belonged on a construction site, not the 41st floor of Harlow Medical Group's corporate headquarters in downtown Boston. Someone had already whispered, "cleaning crew," loud enough to be heard. Someone else had made a show of checking whether she'd left dirt on the carpet. The woman hadn't reacted. She just stood there, holding the hand of a boy who couldn't have been older than 7, waiting with the particular stillness of someone who'd learned not to waste energy on people who'd already decided what they were. Lorraine Harlow had watched all of it from the elevator bank. She'd been meaning to walk straight to her office. She had a 2 o'clock with the board's legal counsel and a stack of acquisition reports that had been sitting unread on her desk since Tuesday. She did not have time for whatever this was. But she'd paused anyway. Something about the woman's stillness had made her pause. "Who is she?" Lorraine asked her assistant, Felix, who materialized at her elbow with the reflexive efficiency of someone who'd been doing this job for 6 years. No record in the system. "Front desk says she asked to speak with whoever runs operations. Wouldn't give a name, just said it was about the rural clinic contracts." Lorraine looked again. The boy was leaning against the woman's arm now, bored the way children get bored in places built entirely for adults. He had a book tucked under his free arm, a paperback with a cracked spine, the kind read so many times the cover had gone soft. He wasn't scared. Whoever this woman was, she hadn't made this feel dangerous for him. She'd made it feel routine, which somehow felt worse. "Have security ask her to leave," Lorraine said. Politely. She walked toward the elevator without looking back. She didn't see the way the woman's jaw set when 2 guards approached. Didn't hear the boy ask, in a voice that carried further than he probably intended, "Mom, are those guys going to make us go away again?" The boardroom on 41 was all floor-to-ceiling glass, and the particular chill of rooms kept cold enough that no one ever got comfortable. Randall Fitch sat at the head of the table, silver-haired and already in full performance mode, the way he always was when he sensed something worth performing for. He'd been CFO for 8 years. Lorraine had inherited him when she took the CEO position 3 years ago and had spent most of that time learning which of his smiles meant yes and which meant he'd already decided no, and was waiting for her to stop talking. Lorraine. Right on time. He gestured to the chair beside him. "We're ready when you are." Across from him, Stuart Crane leaned back in his chair like a man who'd never once been unsure of his welcome. Chief of Operations, efficient with logistics, indifferent to anything that didn't show up on a balance sheet. He nodded at Lorraine without smiling, his version of warmth. Before she could sit, Felix appeared again in the doorway, his expression careful in the way it got when something had gone sideways. "Ma'am, there's a situation downstairs. It's escalating." Lorraine looked at Randall. He waved a hand. "We'll start without you." She took the elevator back down, expecting something manageable. What she found instead was a knot of employees who'd stopped pretending to work and were standing in a loose circle, most of them with their phones half raised, not quite recording but ready to. The 2 security guards flanked the woman at a careful distance. The boy stood pressed against his mother's side, his book clasped in both hands now, his face unreadable. The woman wasn't shouting. She wasn't crying. She was just standing there, very still, while one of the guards explained for what was apparently the 3rd time that she needed to leave. "I'm not causing any disruption," the woman said. Her voice was low and measured. "I just need 10 minutes with someone who can answer a question. You don't have an appointment. You don't have clearance. This is private property. I know what it is." The woman's jaw tightened. "I used to help build it." Lorraine stepped forward. The crowd shifted. The guard straightened. "I'm Lorraine Harlow. You wanted to speak with someone in charge." The woman looked at her. Up close, she was younger than Lorraine had first thought, maybe late 30s, with the kind of tiredness that came from years of work rather than a single bad night. Her jacket was old, but not dirty. The paint stains were green and yellow and looked architectural, the kind you got from marking measurements on walls. Her eyes were steady. "Yes," the woman said. "I do." That was when Stuart Crane stepped out of the elevator, Randall a half step behind him. They must have followed her down. Stuart took in the scene with a single slow look and smiled the way he did when he found someone's expense report didn't add up. Lorraine. He walked closer, hands in his pockets. "Tell me you didn't pull us out of prep for this." "The woman has asked for a brief conversation," Lorraine said evenly. "She's a trespasser." Stuart crouched down slightly, addressing the boy directly, with the exaggerated patience people sometimes used on children when they were actually talking to the adults around them. "Hey, buddy, does your mom do this a lot? Walk into buildings where she doesn't belong?" The woman stepped forward exactly 1 inch. Don't. I'm just asking. Stuart straightened up, brushing his jacket smooth. If she's got something legitimate to say, she can say it through proper channels like every other adult. The boy looked up at his mother. Her hand had tightened on his shoulder, but her face stayed level. His name is Owen, the woman said quietly, and whatever you think you're doing right now, you're doing it wrong. Lorraine felt something move through her chest, something she hadn't expected. She stepped between Stuart and the woman. Stuart, Randall, go back upstairs. I'll handle this. Randall's eyebrows rose. She's not our problem, Lorraine. She's not a problem at all. She's a person asking for 10 minutes. Go upstairs. Stuart's smile thinned. You're making a mistake. I'll add it to the list. She turned to the guards, stand down, and to the woman. Conference room 4. Follow me. You've got your 10 minutes. Conference room 4 was small and had no windows and smelled faintly of old coffee. It was the room Lorraine used for conversations she didn't want anyone to overhear. She gestured to the chairs. The woman helped Owen into one, unzipped his backpack, and handed him a small sketchbook and a pencil case without being asked. He opened the sketchbook immediately, already somewhere else. Talk, Lorraine said. The woman looked at her. Then she said, your rural clinic network is being systematically defunded. Not cut, defunded. There's a difference. Cutting means you make a decision and document it. What's happening here is the money is being reclassified as operational overhead and rerouted before it ever reaches the clinics. 14 of your 32 rural partnerships have received less than 40% of their contracted funding for the past 18 months. Lorraine's chest went tight. That's impossible. We have an audit trail. Your audit trail was designed by the person doing the rerouting. Who are you? The woman reached into her jacket and set a USB drive on the table between them. My name is Bex, Rebecca Solano. 18 months ago, I was the lead contractor on Harlow's rural infrastructure expansion. I built 3 of your clinic sites in rural Kentucky and West Virginia. Then I started asking questions about supply invoices that didn't match work orders, and 6 weeks later, my contract was terminated for what they called project delays. Lorraine stared at her. You're claiming someone retaliated against you for... I'm not claiming anything. It's documented. She nodded at the drive. Everything I found is on there. Payment records, rerouted funds, falsified delivery confirmations, emails between your CFO and a shell company, registered to a holding group out of Delaware that exists solely on paper. Lorraine didn't touch the drive. She needed a moment. She needed more than a moment. If what you're saying is true, and that's a very significant if, why come here instead of going to the state attorney's office? Or the press? Because I wanted to give someone inside the chance to fix it first. Rebecca's voice was even. Because I watched those clinics get built. I watched people in towns that hadn't had a medical facility in 30 years walk through those doors for the first time. And I didn't want to watch all of that disappear because some executive decided it was easier to steal from people who had no other options. Owen looked up from his sketchbook. He'd drawn something, Lorraine couldn't see what, and was examining it with the focused satisfaction small children brought to things they'd made. Mom, he said, can I have my snack? In the front pocket, sweetheart. He dug into the backpack, produced a slightly squashed granola bar, and went back to his drawing. Rebecca watched him for a second, something soft crossing her face before she turned back to Lorraine. I know how this looks. I know I walked in here in work boots with a 7-year-old because I couldn't find anyone to watch him today. I know Stuart Crane just implied I don't belong in your building. She paused. But I built your building's clinic in Pikeville. I poured that foundation. And someone is stealing from the people who use it. Lorraine picked up the drive. She worked through the night. Felix brought her food she didn't eat and coffee she let go cold, and eventually stopped knocking on her office door after the 3rd hour, which meant he'd finally gone home. Lorraine didn't blame him. She didn't call him back. She needed to be alone with what she was reading. The files were meticulous. Rebecca Solano had organized everything the way someone organized things when they knew they'd only get one chance to be believed. Chronologically, cross-referenced, with source documents attached to every claim. Bank transfers. Email threads. A shell company called Meridian Rural Solutions, LLC, registered in Delaware that appeared in Harlow's vendor records as a telecommunications infrastructure provider. Harlow had paid Meridian Rural Solutions $6.8 million over the past 2 years for services that, when Lorraine went looking for them, did not exist. The account receiving the payments traced to a holding company. The holding company traced through 2 layers of corporate registration to a name Lorraine recognized. She sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called the one board member she trusted without qualification, Helena Marsh, 68, semi-retired, who'd been on Harlow's board since before Lorraine was hired and who answered on the third ring despite the fact that it was 11:40 at night. "Lorraine," Helena said, "what's wrong?" Not a question. Helena never asked questions she already knew the shape of. "Everything," Lorraine said. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to not say anything until I'm finished." She talked for an hour, sent Helena copies of the files. Listened to the silence on the other end grow heavier and heavier as Helena read. Finally, Helena said, "Who gave you this?" "A contractor named Rebecca Solano. She came in off the street today. How did she get all this?" "She was on site. She was building the clinics." She saw things that didn't add up and started following the thread. Helena was quiet for another long moment, and she came to you first, not the authorities. She wanted to give us a chance to do the right thing. Helena exhaled. That was either very generous or very naive, maybe both. Lorraine looked at her window. Outside, Boston was still going. Lights in other office towers, headlights on the street below, the city's general indifference to what was happening on this particular floor. Do you know why she'd do that? Give us the chance instead of going straight to the DA? Because she still believes this organization is worth saving. Helena's voice was dry but not unkind. The question is whether she's right. Lorraine's board email went out at 4:30 in the morning. She didn't soften the language. She didn't run it by legal first. She stated the facts as she understood them. Evidence of systematic financial fraud, the redirection of over $6 million intended for rural clinic operations, the involvement of a senior executive whose name she did not include in the email but had been preparing herself to say out loud for the past 4 hours. By 6 a.m., her phone was ringing. Patricia Aldrin, board member, called first. Sharp, direct, awake at an hour that suggested she hadn't slept either. "Tell me you verified this before you sent it." "I verified what I could in 8 hours. The financial records are consistent. The shell company is real. I'm bringing in external forensic accountants this morning. Randall's going to say the documents are fabricated. Let him say it. The Delaware incorporation filings are public record. The account routing numbers are verifiable. You've accused our CFO of fraud based on a USB drive from a fired contractor. You understand how that sounds." "I understand exactly how it sounds." Lorraine stood at her window, watching the city lighten outside. "Patricia, 14 clinics are operating at less than half capacity because someone has been stealing their operating funds for 18 months. Real clinics, real patients, real communities that have no other option. I wasn't going to wait until the paperwork felt comfortable." Patricia was quiet for a long moment. "Then I'll make calls. I need 3 other board members solid before the emergency session. Can Helena give me 2? Already on it." The session was scheduled for 9 a.m. By 8:45, Lorraine was standing in her office trying to remember the last time she'd eaten a real meal when Felix knocked and said quietly, "Miss Solano is in the lobby. She'd like to speak with you before the meeting. Send her up." Rebecca came in with Owen, who was wearing the same jacket as yesterday and carrying a different sketchbook. He looked around Lorraine's office with the calm curiosity of a child comfortable in unfamiliar places. "You got the documents?" Rebecca asked. "I read them all night, and I believe you." Lorraine met her eyes. "I need you to be in that meeting. The board is going to want to hear from the person who gathered this evidence." Something shifted in Rebecca's face. Not relief exactly, but a loosening of something that had been held tight for a long time. Owen tugged on her sleeve. "Mom, is this the lady who's going to fix it?" Rebecca looked at her son, then at Lorraine. "We'll see," she said. "Yeah," Lorraine said. "We'll see." The boardroom was tenser than Lorraine had ever felt it. 8 board members around the long table, 3 empty chairs where Randall and Stewart sat normally, a seat for Helena, who'd flown in on the first flight out of Providence. Rebecca sat against the wall with Owen, who'd set up his sketchbook on his knees without being asked. He worked quietly, unhurried, as if boardrooms were just another place where adults went to sort things out. Randall was already in his chair when Lorraine walked in. He looked calm. Too calm, the way he always looked when he'd had time to prepare a position and was waiting to deploy it. "This is extraordinary," he said before she'd even sat down. "To call an emergency board session based on what? An anonymous tip from a disgruntled former contractor. Do you understand how this looks from outside?" "I understand exactly how it looks," Lorraine said. "The same way it looked when Meridian Rural Solutions received $6.8 million in payments for services that don't exist. Meridian is a legitimate vendor. There's no work product, no deliverables, no record of service. Just wire transfers. We paid for consulting work. It's documented in the vendor agreements." "Who signed the vendor agreements?" Randall's jaw tightened. "I approved the contracts in my capacity as CFO, and the account receiving payment. Who controls that account, Randall?" The room was very quiet. Stewart spoke first. "This is an internal matter." Whatever questions exist about vendor relationships, there's a process for. There is a process, Lorraine said. The process is what I'm running right now. She looked at Helena. Can you speak to what you reviewed last night? Helena opened the folder in front of her. She spoke for 6 minutes steadily, without drama. The numbers, the timeline, the traceable path from Harlow's operating budget to Meridian Rural Solutions to a holding company whose beneficial owner, according to Delaware public records filed 26 months ago, was Randall Fitch. One of the board members, Lawrence Trent, quiet, 70 years old, who'd been on the board since the organization's founding, set down his pen very slowly and looked at Randall the way you looked at someone you'd trusted for a decade and were now trying to reconcile with new information. Randall, Lawrence said. Do you want to respond to that? Randall's calm cracked. Not shattered, cracked, the way ice cracks when the temperature changes and you can't stop the process once it's started. Those records are being misinterpreted. The holding company is a legitimate investment vehicle. The characterization of these payments as fraud is accurate, Patricia said. She'd gotten 4 board members on her side before the meeting, and she'd stopped letting Randall finish his sentences. The forensic accountants are already in the building. We'll have a verified report by end of day. The question isn't whether this happened. The question is what we do about it. Stewart stood up. You're making a mistake. This organization doesn't survive the kind of scrutiny you're inviting. Walk this back. Conduct a quiet internal review. Don't blow up everything we've built because one person showed up with a USB drive. Lorraine looked at him. How much did he promise you? Stewart's expression didn't change, but his hands, which had been relaxed on the table, went still. The vote was 7-1. Randall Fitch and Stuart Crane were removed from their positions, effective immediately. The Meridian vendor contracts were frozen pending investigation. External forensic accountants would have full access to financial records for the preceding 3 years. The board authorized Lorraine to cooperate fully with any relevant regulatory authorities. Randall didn't speak again during the meeting. He sat through the vote with the flat affect of someone in shock, or calculating, or both. When it was done, he stood and walked toward the door and said without turning around, "You'll regret this." "Maybe," Lorraine said, "but not today." Security was waiting in the hallway. The press found out by noon. Lorraine hadn't planned to hold a public statement that day, but when she looked out at the lobby and saw the employees gathered, not protesting, not demanding answers, just standing there in the particular way that meant they were waiting to be told the truth. She went down. She stood in the lobby and told them what she knew. Not everything. Some of it was under investigation, and some of it she hadn't finished processing herself. But the broad facts, the fraud, the diverted funds, what those funds were supposed to have been. Someone in the back called out, "What about the clinics? Are they going to close?" Lorraine's throat tightened. "We're going to do everything we can to stabilize them. I can't promise you more than that right now, but I can promise I'm not letting them disappear." A woman near the front, one of Lorraine's logistics coordinators, raised her hand like she was in school. "Did you know before?" "No," Lorraine said. "I didn't, and I should have asked harder questions. That's on me." The lobby was quiet for a moment. Then someone clapped, then a few more people, then most of them. Lorraine went back upstairs before she could cry in front of her entire company. The next 3 days were the hardest. The forensic accountants confirmed everything. $6.8 million, 26 months, 14 clinics operating on a fraction of their contracted support. The SEC opened a preliminary inquiry. The state attorney's office made contact. Reporters camped outside the building and filed daily updates on a story they were calling an unprecedented breach of nonprofit ethics. 2 board members suggested, gently, that maybe the rural clinic programs should be restructured in light of the cash flow problems the fraud had created. Lorraine told them, without gentleness, that restructuring the programs meant abandoning the people the programs existed to serve. And that wasn't a sentence she was willing to finish. One of them said, "You can't just run an organization on principle. Someone has to pay the bills." Someone was paying the bills, Lorraine said, until Randall stole the money. Rebecca came to the office every morning for those 3 days. She brought Owen, who had apparently decided that the corner of Lorraine's office, where someone had put a plant, was an acceptable place to set up his sketchbook, and who accepted coffee shop scones from Felix with the particular dignity of a child who'd learned to say thank you without being asked. One morning, when Owen was absorbed in drawing something elaborate and Lorraine was trying to hold herself together over a spreadsheet showing exactly how much the emergency funding gap would cost to address, Rebecca set a coffee in front of her without saying anything. Just set it there and went back to her chair. "You don't have to keep coming in," Lorraine said eventually. "I know. You've done what you came to do. You gave us the evidence. You testified. I know, Rebecca said again. I'm here anyway. Why? Rebecca looked at Owen for a moment. He'd gotten his tongue to one side of his mouth in concentration, the way kids did when they were working on something that mattered to them. Because someone told me once that the only people who actually change anything are the ones who stay after the crisis is over. Anyone can start a fire. Staying to make sure the right things burn and the right things don't. That's harder. Who told you that? My father. He was a coal miner in Wyoming who spent 12 years fighting for mine safety regulations that eventually passed. He didn't live to see them pass, but he stayed anyway. Lorraine looked at her coffee, then at the spreadsheet, then at Owen, who had just held up his sketchbook to show Felix his drawing. Felix, who had never in 6 years of working for her showed particular feeling about children's drawings, leaned in and studied it seriously and said something that made Owen laugh. Okay, Lorraine said. Then stay. Randall's lawyers filed a countersuit on the 4th day. It was comprehensive, vicious, and strategically brilliant. It accused Lorraine of orchestrating a hostile board takeover, argued that Rebecca Solano had fabricated or altered financial documents, and included a separate motion questioning whether Rebecca was a fit guardian for Owen, given that she'd repeatedly brought him into what the filing called volatile corporate environments with documented hostile confrontations. Lorraine read the filing at 9 p.m. in her office and felt something cold move through her. Rebecca took it differently. She sat with the filing for a long time after Lorraine gave it to her, Owen already asleep in the lobby on a couch that Felix had quietly made up with a blanket from the office supply closet. When she finally set it down, her face was very still. He's going after Owen, she said. Child Protective Services will review it, their attorney said. It's designed to intimidate, not to succeed. Can they take him? Not based on this. But you'd need to cooperate fully with any review. Document everything. Show stability. I have a rental in Somerville, a school Owen likes. I've had the same pediatrician for 4 years. Rebecca's voice was even. I know how to document stability. What I don't know is how to explain to my son why someone is trying to use him as a weapon. Lorraine looked at her. We fight it the same way we fought the rest of it. With the truth. The truth takes time, Rebecca said. Then we use the time. What they built over the following 2 weeks was less a legal strategy than a record. Lorraine's team documented every aspect of Rebecca's work history, her contractor qualifications, the specific clinics she'd built, and the communities that had used them. They gathered testimonials from clinic administrators, from patients' family members, from the construction teams Rebecca had supervised. They found every email, every work order, every signed completion certificate that demonstrated not just that Rebecca was credible, but that her work had been real and had mattered. A pediatric clinic director in Harlan County, Kentucky, sent an unsolicited letter to Lorraine's office. She'd heard about the lawsuit. She wanted to go on record. The clinic Rebecca built in her county had, in its first year of operation, provided care to 847 patients. Prior to the clinic's opening, the nearest medical facility was 42 miles away. 3 of those 847 patients had come in for what they thought was minor illness and been diagnosed with conditions that, if untreated, would have been fatal. The clinic director didn't phrase it dramatically. She just put the number in the letter. 3 lives, she wrote, from one clinic in 1 year. Rebecca cried when she read it. The specific crying of someone who'd been holding something for a long time and finally had a container to put it in. Owen, who'd been watching, climbed into the chair beside her without asking and put his head on her shoulder. It's okay, Mom, he said. Yeah, sweetheart. Rebecca put her arm around him. It is. The Child Protective Services investigation closed after a single home visit. The caseworker called Lorraine's office afterward, which wasn't procedure but which happened anyway. She said, whoever filed that motion did so in bad faith. The child is fine, more than fine. Close the file. The SEC's findings came 6 weeks after that. Randall Fitch faced 3 federal charges. He settled within 60 days, repaying the diverted funds in full as part of the agreement and accepting a permanent bar from serving in any executive financial role. Stuart Crane's cooperation with investigators earned him a reduced outcome, though it cost him his professional reputation, and, it emerged, a considerable portion of his own savings that he'd tied up in Randall's holding company. It was not the outcome Lorraine had wanted. She'd wanted prison time and a public reckoning and every dollar back in the hands of the people it had been taken from. What she got was a settlement and a paper trail, and in time, enough recovered funds to stabilize the clinic network. She'd learned over those weeks that justice in financial fraud cases rarely looked like justice in the movies. It looked like forensic accountants and SEC filings and settlement agreements written in language specifically designed to avoid drama. It was important and it was necessary, and it felt in the end like watching something very large happen at a very quiet volume. The clinics reopened at full funding within 3 months. All 14. Lorraine flew to Harlan County, Kentucky for the first one. Rebecca came with her. Owen sat in the back of the rental car, pointing out interesting things through the window with the editorial focus of someone who'd spent a lot of time moving through the world at adult speed and had learned to find things worth looking at along the way. The clinic director met them at the door. She was in her 60s, practical, the kind of person who shook hands like she meant it. She looked at Rebecca for a moment. "You're the one who built this," she said. "With the team," Rebecca said. "You're the one who came back for it." Rebecca didn't answer that. But she touched the doorframe as they went in, lightly, the way you touched something that had cost you something to make. 6 months after the board session, Lorraine sat across from Helena in a coffee shop 2 blocks from the office. The kind of place without conference rooms or agendas, just coffee and the particular freedom of a conversation that wasn't being documented. "You're thinking about the next thing," Helena said. It wasn't a question. The organization needs to change structurally, not just oversight mechanisms, the whole way we think about accountability. I want every major financial decision to require dual sign-off. I want quarterly third-party audits. I want a direct line for employees and contractors to raise concerns without going through leadership. That's going to make your executives uncomfortable. Good. Lorraine wrapped both hands around her cup. People shouldn't be comfortable when there's no accountability. They should have to show their work. She paused. I also want to expand the clinic network. There are communities on our existing list that were never funded because the expansion budget was being redirected. I want to go back to that list. 16 communities, Helena said. I looked it up last night. Lorraine looked at her. Helena shrugged. I had a feeling this was where you were going. What about Rebecca Solano? What about her? Her contract was wrongfully terminated. You could offer her a staff position. Lorraine shook her head. I offered. She said no. Surprised? Not really. She's a contractor. She builds things and moves on. That's what she does. She doesn't want a corner office. She wants the work to mean something. Helena was quiet for a moment. And does it? Lorraine thought about 14 clinics running at full capacity. 3 lives documented in 1 letter from 1 director. Owen's sketchbook, which turned out to be full of drawings of the building sites his mother had taken him to, not stick figures but real structural drawings, columns and load-bearing walls and elevation lines, the observations of a child who'd grown up watching someone make things out of nothing. Yeah, Lorraine said. It does. Rebecca's new contract, a different one, for 2 clinic sites in rural Tennessee, bid through proper channels and awarded on merit, started in the spring. Owen turned 8 in March. Lorraine sent a card. He sent one back, hand-drawn, a building with a flag on top that she couldn't entirely identify, but that she hung on the wall of her office next to a printed copy of the clinic director's letter. The organization Harlow Medical Group became in the year that followed wasn't the same one that had existed before. It was quieter in some ways, more deliberate. The board meetings were longer because people actually asked questions now, instead of deferring to whoever spoke first and loudest. The financial reviews were tedious and thorough, and Lorraine found she didn't mind the tedium. She'd learned the hard way that the thing most people called tedious was usually just diligence with less glamorous packaging. She kept the USB drive in her desk drawer. Not as a memento, she wasn't the type for mementos, but as a reminder of how close it had been. How close she'd come to walking past a woman in paint-stained boots and a boy with a paperback, to sending security and taking the elevator and never knowing what was being done with other people's trust. Some mornings she took it out and held it for a moment before putting it back. Not long. Just long enough to remember that the difference between right and wrong was rarely a dramatic confrontation in a marble lobby. It was usually much smaller than that. A pause, a question, a choice to stay in the room for 10 minutes longer than was comfortable. That, Lorraine had decided, was the only principle that actually held under pressure, not ethics frameworks or compliance checklists or mission statements on lobby walls. Just the willingness to stop and ask, what's really happening here and what would it cost me to care? Everything, sometimes. But sometimes everything was the right price to pay.